And I'm starting to think that my grandma's in trouble.
Who's ready to celebrate?
I'm gonna make sure you don't go down.
To our future.
General Hospital.
The evening air in Port Charles carried a strange mixture of excitement and unease. What was supposed to be the most elegant social event of the season quickly transformed into something no one would ever forget. Guests arrived dressed in their finest attire, stepping into the lavish estate where crystal chandeliers shimmered above and soft music floated through the grand halls. The atmosphere felt glamorous, almost magical, and everyone seemed eager to see what surprises the mysterious and wealthy Sidwell had planned for the night. Sidwell greeted each guest with his usual charm, flashing that confident smile that made people both intrigued and slightly suspicious at the same time. He had a reputation for throwing unforgettable parties, but tonight's gathering felt even more extravagant than usual. Long tables were decorated with beautiful flowers, sparkling glasses, and plates filled with gourmet delicacies. It looked like a scene pulled straight from a fairy tale, or at least that's what everyone believed at first. Among the guests were familiar faces who brought their own complicated history into the room. Some arrived hoping for romance, others came out of curiosity, and a few simply couldn't resist the chance to witness whatever drama might unfold. In Port Charles, a glamorous dinner party rarely stayed peaceful for long. Laughter echoed through the room as conversations began to flow. Someone joked about how Sidwell always managed to outdo himself, while another guest whispered that the man clearly enjoyed keeping everyone guessing. One couple stood near the balcony, teasing each other about who would cause the biggest scene tonight. Their playful argument turned into a flirtatious moment that made nearby guests smile. Across the room, two old rivals exchanged a tense glance that lasted just a second too long. They quickly forced polite smiles for the sake of appearances, but the tension between them was impossible to ignore. In a town filled with secrets and betrayals, even the most glamorous events often served as battlegrounds for unresolved conflicts. Meanwhile, Sidwell watched everything carefully. He moved gracefully through the crowd, offering compliments and raising his glass in celebration. But behind his polished demeanor was a mind that seemed constantly calculating. Some guests felt it. There was something about his eyes that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. As dinner began, the guests took their seats around the massive table. The mood was light and playful at first. Stories were shared, jokes were exchanged, and a few embarrassing memories from past Port Charles events were brought up, making everyone laugh a little louder than usual. One guest teased another about a disastrous date from years ago, causing the entire table to erupt with laughter. Someone else insisted the story was exaggerated, which only made it funnier. For a moment, it truly felt like a joyful celebration where old grudges had been forgotten. But the peaceful mood didn't last. A strange tension slowly crept into the room. At first, it was subtle. A guest noticed an unusual smell drifting through the air. Another person commented that one of the decorative doors near the dining hall looked slightly open. No one thought much of it, but the feeling of unease grew stronger with every passing minute. Sidwell stood and raised his glass, preparing to make a toast. Everyone turned their attention toward him as he began speaking about friendship, loyalty, and the unpredictable nature of life in Port Charles. His words sounded poetic, almost philosophical. Then something unexpected happened. A loud noise echoed from the hallway nearby. The music stopped. Conversations froze. Every pair of eyes turned toward the sound. At first, people tried to laugh it off. Someone joked that maybe the kitchen staff had dropped a tray. Another guest teased that Sidwell probably planned the interruption as part of the evening's entertainment. But when one curious guest stepped toward the hallway to investigate, the playful mood vanished instantly. The door creaked open. Inside the dimly lit room beyond, something shocking waited. A figure lay motionless on the floor. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence felt heavy, almost unreal. Then gasps filled the hallway as more guests gathered near the doorway, trying to understand what they were seeing. Shock spread through the crowd like wildfire. The elegant dinner party had just transformed into the most disturbing mystery Port Charles had seen in years. Some guests stepped back in disbelief, while others rushed forward trying to figure out what had happened. One person nervously joked that this had to be some kind of terrible accident, but the tension in the room made it clear the situation was far from a simple accident. Sidwell himself approached slowly, his confident expression fading into something far more serious. For the first time that evening, the charming host looked genuinely unsettled. Questions began to fly from every direction. How did this happen? Who could possibly be responsible? And perhaps most importantly, why here, at Sidwell's party? The evening that started with laughter and sparkling glasses had turned into a storm of suspicion. Every guest suddenly looked at the others with a new level of uncertainty. After all, in Port Charles, secrets rarely stay hidden for long.
Some people began whispering theories immediately. One guest insisted that the situation had to be connected to an old feud. Another suggested that someone at the table might know far more about the situation than they were admitting. The tension grew even stronger when a certain pair of guests exchanged a glance that looked almost guilty. Across the room, someone nervously tried to lighten the mood again, joking that Sidwell had clearly taken the phrase "dramatic dinner party" a little too seriously. A few people chuckled awkwardly, grateful for the brief moment of humor in an otherwise shocking situation. But the reality of what had just been discovered quickly settled over the entire estate. No one was leaving any time soon. Sidwell, regaining some of his composure, calmly suggested that everyone remain where they were until things could be sorted out. His voice carried authority, but there was still a hint of tension beneath his words. The glamorous party had officially become a mystery, and every person in that room had suddenly become part of it. Romance, rivalry, secrets, and unexpected twists had already filled the night. But what came next would shake Port Charles even more, because the discovery in that hallway was only the beginning. As the guests stood together under the glittering chandeliers, one thing became clear to everyone present. Someone in that room knew the truth. And before the night was over, that truth was going to change everything. The question was, who would reveal it first? And when the secrets finally came out, would any of these relationships survive the chaos that was about to unfold? Port Charles had seen its share of dramatic nights, but this elegant evening was quickly turning into a story people would talk about for years. One shocking discovery had already stunned the guests, but the biggest revelations were still waiting to explode. The uneasy silence that filled the mansion refused to fade. Guests stood frozen in small groups, whispering nervously as the shocking discovery lingered in everyone's mind. Only minutes earlier, the room had been filled with laughter, teasing, and playful flirting. Now the atmosphere had shifted completely. A few guests moved closer together, instinctively seeking comfort in familiar faces. One woman grabbed her partner's arm, her voice barely above a whisper as she asked if they should leave. But the truth was obvious. No one was going anywhere. Sidwell slowly walked back into the dining room, his posture straight, but his expression more serious than anyone had ever seen before. The charming host, who had welcomed everyone with effortless confidence, now looked like a man carrying 1,000 questions. He cleared his throat and tried to regain control of the evening. "Let's all stay calm," he said smoothly, though the tension in his voice was impossible to miss. "There must be an explanation." Some guests exchanged skeptical glances. In Port Charles, when someone said there must be an explanation, it usually meant the story was about to become much more complicated. Across the room, two guests stood near the balcony doors, speaking quietly to each other. Their conversation quickly turned from concern into nervous laughter. "Only in this town," one of them joked, shaking their head, "you come for a fancy dinner and end up in the middle of a mystery." The other guest chuckled softly. "Next time, we're just ordering pizza." Their attempted humor earned a few weak smiles from nearby guests. In tense moments like this, even the smallest joke felt like a lifeline. But the uneasy feeling remained. Someone suddenly pointed out something strange. The figure discovered in the hallway looked familiar. That single comment sent a ripple of whispers through the entire room. People began trying to remember who had arrived earlier in the evening, who had been seen talking to whom, and who might have disappeared during dinner. One man nervously adjusted his jacket while glancing toward the hallway again. He insisted that he had seen the mysterious figure earlier that evening near the garden entrance. Another guest disagreed immediately, claiming that person had been near the bar moments before dinner. The conflicting memories only made the mystery deeper. Meanwhile, Sidwell stepped aside to speak privately with a few guests he seemed to trust. His voice was calm, but the intensity in his eyes revealed that he was thinking several steps ahead. He had spent weeks planning this elaborate gathering. The decorations, the menu, the guest list, everything had been carefully arranged to create a night people would never forget. Well, that part had certainly worked, but this was not the kind of unforgettable moment he had intended.
At the far end of the room, a couple who had spent most of the evening flirting with each other now looked far more serious. The woman leaned closer to her companion and whispered something that caused his eyebrows to shoot upward in surprise. "Are you serious?" he murmured. She nodded slowly. Apparently, she had overheard an argument earlier in the evening near the staircase. Two voices, one angry, one desperate. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming it was just another heated Port Charles disagreement. Now she wasn't so sure. Across the room, another unexpected moment unfolded. One guest, clearly trying to cope with the tension, lifted a glass of wine and announced dramatically, "Well, this dinner party just went from elegant to legendary." A few people couldn't help laughing. "Legendary for all the wrong reasons," someone replied. The brief moment of humor helped ease the tension slightly, but the mystery still hung over everyone like a storm cloud. Then something else caught everyone's attention. A small object had been discovered near the hallway. It wasn't large, but it was unmistakably important. A piece of jewelry. One guest gasped the moment they saw it, because that piece of jewelry belonged to someone at the party. Suddenly, the entire room exploded with speculation. Eyes turned toward the guest who recognized the item. Their face turned pale as every person in the room stared at them. They immediately tried to explain, insisting the jewelry must have been lost earlier in the evening. Their voice trembled as they spoke, clearly aware that the situation now placed them directly in the spotlight. Some guests believed the explanation. Others were far less convinced. Sidwell stepped forward again, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said carefully. But the truth was unavoidable. Suspicion had officially entered the room. Friendships that had seemed strong only hours earlier now felt fragile. Old rivalries resurfaced. Long-buried secrets suddenly felt dangerously close to being exposed. One guest quietly whispered to another that the night was starting to feel like one of those wild Port Charles stories people gossip about for years. And they weren't wrong, because something about this mystery didn't feel random. It felt personal, very personal. Meanwhile, the romantic tension that had been building between two particular guests earlier in the evening hadn't disappeared completely. In fact, the chaos seemed to bring them closer together. They stood side by side now, sharing quiet observations and exchanging nervous smiles. One of them softly joked, "This might be the strangest first date in history." The other laughed quietly, "At least it's memorable." Even in the middle of confusion and suspicion, sparks of romance were still flickering throughout the mansion. But the biggest surprise of the night had not yet arrived, because just as everyone began debating what might have happened in that hallway, a voice suddenly spoke from the entrance of the room, a voice that none of the guests expected to hear. The moment that voice echoed through the mansion, every person in the room turned toward the door in stunned silence, because the person standing there was someone they believed would never appear tonight, and their arrival was about to reveal a secret that would shake Port Charles even more than the shocking discovery earlier in the evening. The elegant dinner party had already become a night of mystery, but now it was turning into something far more explosive, and the truth that was about to surface would change several lives forever.
The only one who can give him what he needs right now.
The alternative to making this agreement was unacceptable. I had to put it to bed.
Why won't you let this go?
Just because you can do it. Maybe we should show him that by doing the opposite.
I just need to know how far you would go to protect her.
Now it's time to do it my way.